Hello, I'm Terry Kolath here today with Professor Adrian Kerr. We're talking about a course he's offering in the Academy, The 7 Wonders of the Ancient World, in 2 sessions. Thank you for joining me, Professor Kerr.
It's a pleasure to be here at Shell Point, Terry. Thank you.
Well, I like how you took 7 wonders in 2 parts and decided to start us out talking about why we even look at the 7 wonders.
Indeed. It's quite a conundrum as to how have we accepted it into modern thinking. Where did it come from? Who originated it? And it's very interesting to track back where the concept of 7 wonders came from. I will take you through the various candidates who might have come up with the concept, but now we identified one individual in very late Greek, early Roman times, who actually referred to the 7 wonders of the world and listed them. All of them but one, and listed one twice.
Interesting.
So, for instance, Babylon was mentioned because of the walls of Babylon and the hanging gardens of Babylon. So they were 2 wonders of the world, and we'll talk a lot about that.
Both in Babylon.
Both in Babylon. And then one, which I'll explain when we have the talks, one was missed off.
Interesting. Okay, so we have 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it's important to say ancient world.
Correct, because it's become fairly common these days to have 7 wonders of the modern world, 7 wonders of the medieval world, 7 architectural wonders, 7 natural wonders. It goes on and on and on. And there are votes regularly on the internet as to why don't you vote for the 7 wonders? But I'm sticking to the original 7 wonders and how they originated, where they were, why they were built, and what they look like, because in fact in all cases we have a pretty good idea what they look like, although there's only one which has survived to present day.
And we'll find that out at the class.
That's at the class, that's the secret.
So we're starting with the statue of Zeus.
This was in Olympia, which is in the western part of the Peloponnese in Greece. It had always been a religious center. And when the Greek city-states thought of having competition in the form of Olympic Games, Olympia was one of the 4 sites. That's why it's every 4 years, because it went around each of the 4 sites, and Olympia was one of them. And so it grew up as an Olympic site, hence the word Olympic, but it also had a great tradition of religion and the temple of Zeus. They believed that Mount Olympus was next door, and that's where the gods lived. And so they built this massive temple of Zeus, which is the same period as the Parthenon in Greece, the same architect, same design. You'd easily mix them up, other than the fact that it doesn't exist anymore. But it's not the temple, and this is the interesting thing, it's not the temple that was the wonder of the world, it was the statue of Zeus inside the temple that people came from all around the Mediterranean to wonder at.
Amazing. And then we go on to the Colossus of Rhodes.
The Colossus of Rhodes straddled the harbor of Rhodes, which is a great city-state, of course, in the Aegean. But the question we all ask ourselves is, did it really straddle the harbor? Because if you go to Rhodes today on vacation, you'll see 2 pillars with deer at the top of them, which represents where the legs were, and the ships used to pass between his legs. But I will disclose recent excavations which put a different flavor on where the Colossus actually was constructed.
Fascinating. And then at the finale for session 1, the Pharos Lighthouse at Alexandria.
This is the one that most people would forget, and it's the Pharos Lighthouse in Alexandria, and it was built on the Pharos Island, and it was built by the people who succeeded Alexander. So Ptolemy was his admiral, and he took Egypt when Alexander died, and they became the Ptolemy, and they were, of course, the last Ptolemy was Cleopatra, also known as Elizabeth Taylor. She was Cleopatra the 7th, and there were 13 Ptolemies. But that 300-year period expanded on the ancient Egyptian civilization and gave it a Macedonian Greek flavor, and they made Alexandria in Egypt the largest port in the world and one of the biggest cities in the world, famous library, etc. And to help the ships find their way into Alexandria by day and by night, they erected a huge lighthouse which had a mirror to reflect the sunlight during the day, and at night they would have a fire burning, so you could actually approach this tricky coastline in northern Egypt by following this lighthouse, and I'll tell you what happened to it.
Fabulous. Then we move on to part 2 and start with the Mausoleum.
The mausoleum is a commonly used expression for a structure where you would bury somebody or put a coffin in. And it comes from the word, the king, Mausolus, in southwest Turkey, which was a city-state of Greek nature, but during the period that we're interested in, it was dominated by the Empire of Persia, once again. And it was under the thumb of Persia, but it was allowed to have its own king, and he and his wife ran the city. It was a city-state on the water with great success, and he was one of the people who mentioned, I found it in brick and I left it in marble. And then when he died, his wife, who's got a great history of her own, decided to build a structure that people would remember him by. And it's an integral structure showing bits of Greek style, but also Egyptian style. And it is now no longer in existence, but interestingly, we can put it back together again from the records of those days. And there are still some bits lying on the ground if you go to Halicarnassus.
And then the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
The Hanging Gardens of Babylon is a fascinating historical whodunit, because they were referred to by ancient travelers, the Greeks for instance, and the impression was that these were gardens which are suspended in the sky, which is a bit of a tall order. So they tried to make that into a more realistic scenario by saying, no, these gardens were actually in the tower or the walls of, which were the greatest walls in the world at that time. And so it was that referred to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon to this present day. I'm going to destroy that legend and say that there were hanging gardens, but they were not in Babylon.
All right. And then the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus.
Yes. This is a very popular place to visit. Those of the people who go on cruises will call in to Ephesus, which was a great port during the classical Greek period and then Roman period. And it was a center of religion for many, many hundreds of years. And Artemis, or Diana, it's the same, the Greeks and the Romans had the same gods but changed their names. This was a place where she had lived, and therefore it was a holy place, and they built a beautiful temple which was very similar to the Parthenon. And today there's only one poor sad column standing, and that half of that has been reconstructed in concrete. But Ephesus is a wonderful place, and we'll talk about all the other ruins you can see nearby, as well as Mary's house where she came to live for her last days, according to legend.
Fascinating. And then you end with one of your favorite places.
Yes, it's the only one which is still there. And really, it's a remarkable feat of engineering when you think this was built 2500 BC, which is 4,500 years old, and it's pretty much as it was, although the skin, the casing, has been robbed to build more modern structures. This has withstood many earthquakes, rain, sand, foreign armies, battles, and there it is today. Amazing. And it's 4,500 years. In fact, it was the largest man-made objects until the Middle Ages, when the great Gothic cathedrals of Western Europe were constructed. It's 460 feet high, roughly. And so if you came to the planet Earth before the Gothic cathedral constructed and said, take me to your tallest building, this would have been it for nearly 4,000 years. And I'm going to tell you which building it was that superseded it.
All right. This is an amazing opportunity to take a walk through ancient history as Professor Adrian Keir tells you a little bit more about each of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.